Canon law obliges priests to make an annual retreat of about 5 to 8 days. And this time helps us refocus on the Lord to whom we have given our lives in love. Last year I made my retreat at Notre Dame Priory, which is a recently established Benedictine monastery in Tasmania that celebrates the Preconciliar liturgy. And one of my lasting memories from my time at Notre Dame Priory was from my first dinner there. Before grace, as the community of monks watched on, the prior approached me carrying a pitcher of water and a towel, and with these he proceeded to wash my hands. Having only just arrived, I was profoundly moved by this very simple but powerful act of hospitality. Saint Benedict is renowned as the founder of monasticism in the Western Church. And typically when people think of monasteries, they tend to think of prayer and discipline and silence and solitude. Most people don't associate monastic life with hospitality. We don't think of monks sort of sitting there having huge dinner parties, you know, the wine freely flowing and good conversation. For St. Benedict, however, hospitality is an essential work of monasteries. Monasteries are places where men and women go to seek God with all their heart, mind, body, and soul. And it's precisely because monasteries are places dedicated to the love of God that they are also places dedicated to love of neighbour in the form of hospitality. Today, Jesus explains the single-hearted love that he demands of his apostles. Jesus instructs the 12. Anyone who prefers father or mother to me is not worthy of me. Anyone who prefers son or daughter, or who does not take up his cross and follow in my footsteps, is not worthy of me. Anyone who finds his life will lose it. Anyone who loses his life for my sake will find it. These words describe that radical love of God that inflames the heart of the monk. But Jesus is not addressing these words to monks only. He is speaking to his apostles, and therefore to all of us. He wants to be the chief love of our lives. Nobody and nothing, not even family, may come between us and the love of God. All these other things, these other good things like family and friends, and these all are meant to help us, be expressions of our love for God and help us love God better. One of the ways we love God is by loving our neighbour. And one of the ways we love our neighbour is hospitality. The Lord makes this exact point today. After his words about loving God, he goes on to speak about loving our neighbour by means of hospitality. Anyone who welcomes you welcomes me, and those who welcome me welcome the one who sent me. The word hospitality comes from the Latin word hospes, meaning stranger or guest, but really stranger. And it itself is formed from a connected word hostis, which means enemy. Think of hostis, think of hostile. Yeah? The word hospes is the Latin root of words such as host, to host something or someone, hospital, hospice, hotel, hostel, and hospitality. Hospitality is therefore the act of welcoming someone as a guest. For the Christian, hospitality takes on added spiritual significance, because by hospitality we do not merely welcome someone as a guest, we welcome them as we would welcome Christ. We welcome them and Christ present in them. Anyone who welcomes you welcomes me. St. Benedict understood that hospitality is a way of welcoming Christ into our lives in the disguise of strangers and guests. And so he devoted an entire chapter of his monastic rule to hospitality. And there he writes, "Let all guests who arrive be received as Christ, because he will say, 'I was a stranger and you took me in.' When therefore a guest is announced, let him be met by the superior and the brethren with every mark of charity. In the greeting, let all humility be shown to the guests, whether coming or going. With the head bowed or the whole body prostrate on the ground, let Christ be adored in them as he is also received in them." So seriously does St. Benedict treat the presence of Christ in his guests, that he requires they be welcomed with an act of worship, usually reserved for God alone, a bow or even prostration, to lie flat on the floor as a priest does at his ordination. These days we tend to speak of entertaining rather than hospitality. If you watch The Block or House Rules, you've heard the judges and the prospective homeowners at the end of the show looking to buy these beautiful properties describing various rooms in the house as great for entertaining. Having guests around, we feel these days, means putting on a show. It's like we're setting up the stage, putting on the costumes, and we are the stars of the production. Our guests are there simply to affirm us and admire us, rather than to be the focus of our attention. Hospitality, as distinct from entertaining, requires us to drop the facade of perfectionism so that we can be vulnerable and real. How often that sense of everything has to be perfect and I have to look perfect and the meal has to be like it's from a 5-star restaurant and a 3-hat restaurant, or how often that can become a barrier to actually being hospitable to people. We think, oh, it's going to be too much effort, too much work, too exhausting. Oh, I just won't bother. And so it becomes a barrier to hospitality. Hospitality requires a vulnerability. When we drop that, when we give ourselves permission to put aside that perfectionism and say, look, I will be as I am, and my guests will be as they are. This vulnerability is an essential precondition for love of neighbour, and especially for friendship. As a form of charity, hospitality is a virtue, a habit. And the key to forming a habit is to take the first step. Inviting other people into our home in an environment free of formality and perfectionism, in an environment that's open to vulnerability, encourages other people to respond in the same way. As a priest, it's my privilege to often be the beneficiary of other people's hospitality, and there are people here who are extending that privilege to me in the not too distant future, that they are that actually is a planned event, that's not a hint. And while I enjoy fine dining and dressing up, beautiful decor in a beautiful restaurant or a beautiful home as much as the next person, what I really love as a priest is being able to get to know families and parishioners as they are in their home, in their daily lives, and for them to get to know me in the same way. And this is what hospitality enables. I think it was only because, or in part because, the Blessed Virgin Mary had and possessed this habit of hospitality, of being able to welcome people without a mask, that disposed her to welcome Christ himself. As St. Benedict says, all guests are to be welcomed as Christ. And so when the angel came to Mary and in a sense offered Christ to her and asked her to open her heart and her home to him, she said yes. And in doing that, that act of simple hospitality, welcoming that guest who was Christ, she changed the world. This is the power of hospitality. And we ask our Blessed Mother to help us see her Son in those we invite into our home.